Don't you just love those panels with the cute individual images? Do you purchase them and once you get them home and they've made themselves comfortable in your sewing studio, your ideas become elusive? Hi, I'm Cyndi McChesney, author of Fun with Panels and the sequel, Playful Panel Quilts. In my latest book, Playful Panel Quilts, I take you on a deeper dive into how to use those multi-image panels in 3 different styles of quilts, from simple 1 and 2 block designs to row by row quilts, and finally art style montage quilts. One of the hurdles to using this type of panels is the math of making it all come together. And that's the key to unlocking your imagination and to creating unique quilts that you design. Today I'm going to illustrate one of the basic principles of working with this type of panel so that you can use them in 1 and 2 block designs and then carry this process forward into row by row and art style montage quilts. Let's get started. Let's begin by using an Irish chain as an example. Just a simple Irish chain that alternates a 9-patch block with a plain block, and that is what creates the design of the Irish chain. But in place of the solid plain block, I'm going to place a panel image. Now, let's talk about this panel because when I got started with this, they were not the size that I needed them to be. As a matter of fact, after I cut them all apart and got them squared up, I noticed that they were actually kind of rectangular. They're about 5 1/8 by 5 5/8. My 9-patch blocks are going to finish at 4.5 inches. The reason I chose 4.5 inches is because I can trim my panel image down to a 5-inch square, which would finish at 4.5 inches. And the 9-patch is based on a 3 grid, so the number, whatever that might be, has to divide equally by 3. 4.5 will divide equally by 3, and it's a number I can work with. So if I trim this panel down to about 5 inches square, I can work with it along with this 9-patch block. So I'm going to start by trimming a little bit off the top and the bottom to bring it to 5 inches. And then I want to make sure that it is side to side also 5 inches. And because these little scarves stick out here, I want to try and take about the same amount off of both sides, so just under 1/8 of an inch. Now once you have your panel images square to the size that matches your 9-patch, you're ready to go. So I'm going to demonstrate that one more time, and then I'll show you how this would all come together. So here is my block. I cut these apart. There's no space between this particular panel image, so I had to cut them one right next to the other. Resulted in roughly 5 1/8 by 5 5/8. I want to trim it down so that it will be 5 inches square so that it will finish at 4.5 inches. And there's enough room here that I can trim a little bit off the top and a little bit off the bottom. So that's what I'm going to do. And maybe just shave some off the side as well. So starting with the top and the bottom so that I get 5 inches. Because 5 when finished will finish at 4.5. And I'm going to just take a little bit off this right side. Not much to take off there, really. All right, once I have those all together, you can see that the trimmed panel image is now the same size as my 9-patch, and that's what I need for an Irish chain. And when you do a very simple Irish chain, all that's going to happen is you alternate your 9-patch blocks with the solid squares, which would have just been a solid color, usually the background color, but I'm going to use panel images instead, and I get a very fun start to an Irish chain. Now you could add sashing and cornerstones. A lot of simple Irish chains do have that to increase the size of the quilt. What happens though, because this is a fairly small block when finished, 4.5 inches, and you say to yourself, well, I really want a bigger block. That's okay. What can I do with this same exact panel image? I have a solution for you, and that is that you will add coping strips. Now, coping strips help you get from the measurement you have to the measurement you want. In this case, I have a finished 4.5-inch panel segment. But I've decided I want to go with 6-inch 9-patch blocks. So I've got to bring my panel images up to 6 inches as well. The way to do that is to add a coping strip or a coping border. And when you do that, there's a little math that has to happen. You begin with your finished sizes. My 9-patch is going to finish at 6 inches, which means my panel image also has to finish at 6 inches. Right now it finishes at 4.5. The difference between 6 and 4.5 is 1.5 inches, and I want equal amounts on all sides. So I would divide that by 2. So I'd have an equal amount here and here, here and here. The difference is 1.5 inches. When you divide that again in 2, that would be 3/4 of an inch on each side. Before you cut your strips, you want to add 1/2 inch for seam allowances, which means I'm cutting my strips at 1.25 inches. Then I would cut 2 of the strips at 5 inches for the sides and 6.5 inches for the top and the bottom, and sew those on. And then I've got the great start with 6-inch blocks, because you can see my panel images now match the same size as my 9-patch. And so by just doing a little bit of a coping strip, I have now created the panel image to be bigger than the original that I started out with. I think you can see that by knowing how to trim down a panel image or add coping strips, you can adjust the size of that panel image to use in a simple 1 or 2 block quilt like an Irish chain, or you can also insert those panel images into traditional quilt blocks like I've done in the row by row quilt behind me. Once you've mastered this technique and gotten successful in this key of how to make these blocks work as the focal point, the panel images into a block or into a 1 or 2 block design, the world opens up for you as to what you can do with those multi-image panels. I'm Cyndi McChesney, and I invite you to explore playful panel quilts to learn additional skills, including how to graph original quilt blocks, create original foundation pieced blocks, word applique, and so much more. Thanks for joining me today.